"By winter you'll birth me twins," the most feared Mafia boss declared to the poor waitress. On the coldest night, a broke girl with a backbone meets the city's quiet monster, and he pays all her debts with one signature. He offers protection, a penthouse, and a prophecy that could end a war. But the moment she steps inside his world, enemies circle, cameras flash, and a rumor becomes a weapon. She sets her own terms, her body, her choice, until a scan reveals two heartbeats that change everything. A rival wants her ruined, an ex wants her scared, and somewhere inside his council, a traitor wants her gone. When she's taken, he doesn't send an army, he becomes one. Explosions light the docks, secrets crack the throne, love sounds like a vow and a threat. If a king built on fear risks it all for a waitress with twins, who falls first, the empire, the traitor, or their rules? And when winter comes, will his command become her destiny or his undoing? The neon sign of Joe's Diner flickered against rain-slicked windows, casting intermittent red shadows across the empty booths. Ivy Hale's feet ached as she wiped down the counter for the 100th time that night, the clock above the grill crawling toward closing time. The late-night silence, broken only by the hum of aging refrigerators and the tap of rain against glass. The bell above the door chimed. 3 men entered, bringing with them the smell of wet leather and expensive cologne. The first 2 surveyed the diner with practiced efficiency, but it was the third man who commanded attention. Tall, dangerous elegance in a tailored black suit that probably cost more than Ivy made in a year. Enzo Valente. Everyone knew his name, even if they pretended they didn't. The man who controlled the city's shadows. He slid onto a counter stool with fluid grace, his bodyguards taking positions near the door. "Coffee, please." His voice was quiet, cultured, nothing like what she'd expected from someone who inspired such fear. Ivy's hands trembled slightly as she poured the coffee, but she kept her voice steady. "Anything else?" He studied her with dark eyes that missed nothing. "By winter, you'll birth me twins." The coffee pot nearly slipped from her grip. "Excuse me?" "I need heirs, 2 of them. The families are at war, and a proper succession will secure peace." He spoke as if discussing the weather, not making an outrageous demand of a stranger. "You're insane," Ivy managed, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Your employer, Joe, owes considerable gambling debts. Those debts are now mine." Enzo withdrew an envelope from his jacket, as are the diner's back rent and utilities. He slid the paperwork across the counter. Ivy stared at the numbers, her stomach dropping. 3 months of unpaid rent, mounting bills she'd suspected but never confirmed, her job, her tiny apartment above the diner, everything suddenly balanced on a knife's edge. "You have 3 days." Enzo placed a black credit card beside her hand. "To decide." He stood, straightening his cuffs with meticulous precision. The coffee sat untouched, steam curling into the fluorescent-lit air. The bell chimed again, and they were gone, leaving Ivy alone with the impossible proposition and the sleek black card that seemed to mock her. Her legs shaky, she made her way to Joe's office. The safe stood open. He never remembered to close it properly. Inside, exactly as Enzo had said, lay the eviction notice and stack of overdue bills. The amounts matched down to the penny. Ivy's mind raced as she went through closing procedures on autopilot. Chairs up, floors swept, register counted. The routine tasks did nothing to quiet the chaos in her head. At 2:15 a.m., she locked the front door, double-checking it from habit. The rain had settled into a steady drizzle, soaking through her thin jacket as she began the walk home. A dark sedan idled across the street, its engine a low purr in the wet night. She'd worked this neighborhood long enough to know every regular's car. This one didn't belong. Her pace quickened, shoes splashing through puddles that reflected the streetlights in broken fragments. The card burned in her pocket like a brand, a weight far heavier than its mere ounces should allow. The 3 flights up to her studio apartment had never felt longer. Inside, the digital clock on her microwave blinked 3:02 a.m. in harsh green numbers. Sirens wailed somewhere in the distance, their cry fading into the night's ambient noise of the city. Ivy sank into one of her 2 kitchen chairs, placing the black card on the scratched Formica table. In the dim light from her single window, the card's embossed surface caught what little illumination there was, the raised numbers and name gleaming faintly. She needed answers before she could even consider responding. Who was Enzo Valente, really? Beyond the whispered rumors and fearful glances, beyond the perfectly tailored suit and quiet authority, what kind of man demanded heirs from a stranger? What kind of man could casually acquire debts just to use them as leverage? Tomorrow. No, today, she corrected herself. She would start digging. The library's computers would let her search news archives. Maybe she could find someone who'd worked with him, or for him, someone who might tell her what she was really dealing with. The sirens had faded completely now, leaving only the persistent drum of rain against her window. Ivy stared at the card, its presence transforming her tiny kitchen into something foreign and dangerous. 3 days to decide, 3 days to choose between safety and the unknown, between surviving and whatever Enzo Valente's world might hold. She could feel the weight of eyes on her building, knowing the sedan was likely still there, watching, waiting. But she wouldn't be rushed into this decision, no matter how powerful he was. She needed facts, not rumors. She needed truth before she could even begin to consider his impossible proposal. The clock ticked to 3:03 a.m., and Ivy remained at her table, the black card before her, like a gauntlet thrown down in challenge. The night pressed against her windows, and somewhere in its depths, Enzo Valente waited for her answer. But first she would learn exactly who was making this offer, what resources he truly commanded, and most importantly, why he had chosen her. Sunrise painted thin stripes across Ivy's kitchen counter as she spooned instant coffee into her chipped mug. Her phone propped against the sugar bowl, she scrolled through local news archives while bitter steam warmed her face. The apartment was quiet, save for the distant sounds of early morning traffic and the occasional creak of old pipes. She'd been awake since 4, unable to sleep with the weight of yesterday's encounter sitting heavy on her chest. The articles painted a complex picture. Enzo Valente, ruthless syndicate boss, yet founder of multiple youth centers in struggling neighborhoods. Stories detailed anonymous donations to children's hospitals, alongside whispered accusations of calculated violence. Unlike flashier crime bosses, he operated by strict codes, brutal consequences for breaking rules, but protection for those who kept them. His face rarely appeared in photographs, just glimpses at charity galas or the occasional distant shot from surveillance footage released to the press. Southside Youth Center receives anonymous $1 million grant, one headline read. The photo showed teenagers in a newly renovated gym, their faces bright with possibility. Below it, a much darker story. Warehouse fire claims 3 lives, Valente organization suspected. The police report cited suspicious circumstances, but mentioned no arrests. Typical. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened a business registry website. The loan company holding Joe's gambling debt had changed hands 3 months ago, now owned by a shell corporation that traced back to Valente Holdings. The payment terms had shifted right after, becoming impossible for someone like Joe to meet. The interest had nearly doubled, and the payment schedule accelerated. She clicked through page after page, connecting dots that formed an unmistakable pattern. This wasn't random. He'd engineered this situation, created the pressure that would force her choice. A chess game, where he'd moved pieces months in advance, anticipating her every possible reaction. She took a long sip of coffee, grimacing at the bitter taste that matched her thoughts. The day shift dragged by in a blur of coffee refills and greasy plates. By closing time, her feet ached and her mind raced with everything she'd learned. Enzo was calculating, patient, and apparently accustomed to getting exactly what he wanted. The diner had been unusually busy, leaving her no time to process what lay ahead. Maybe that was a blessing. "You okay, honey?" her manager had asked when she'd dropped a stack of menus. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just tired," she'd lied, picking up the scattered, laminated cards. How could she explain that she might be seeing her future instead? The back alley was dark when she took out the trash, streetlight creating more shadows than illumination. The smell of rotting food and stale cooking oil hung in the damp air. Ivy shivered, tugging her thin jacket closer against the evening chill. Her keys jangled in her pocket, one positioned between her fingers, a habit from years of late-night shifts. 2 men stepped out from behind the dumpster, expensive suits, hard eyes. One wore a signet ring she recognized from her research, the Leone family crest. The gold caught what little light reached the alley, winking at her like a warning. Neither man bothered to hide their purpose. Their stance blocked any path of escape. "Quite a card you're carrying," the taller one said, his smile sharp as broken glass. "Corrado Leone sends his regards." His accent was thick, and something cruel lingered behind his politeness. "I don't know what you're talking about." Ivy's voice stayed steady, even as her pulse quickened. She took a half step back, feeling the rough brick wall behind her. "Sweet of Enzo, isn't it?" The shorter man circled behind her, his cologne too strong, too close. Using a waitress as bait, When you publicly refuse him, it'll be quite the humiliation. I'm not anyone's bait. Ivy's hand closed around her phone in her pocket. Her thumb found the emergency button without looking. 3 more seconds of holding it would send an alert. Return the card. The tall one stepped closer, close enough that she could smell mint on his breath. Before you become collateral damage in a game, you don't understand. Headlights swept the alley, cutting through the darkness. A black SUV glided to a stop, blocking the exit. The engine purred quietly before shutting off. Ivy held her breath as the back door opened. Enzo emerged like a shadow taking form, his movements fluid and controlled. He wore a tailored dark suit that seemed to absorb what little light reached the alley. His face revealed nothing, as his gaze moved from Ivy to the men flanking her. Gentlemen. His voice was soft, almost conversational. You seem lost. The words carried a chill despite their mild delivery. What happened next was too fast to follow. The shorter man reached inside his jacket, but Enzo was already moving. A precise strike to the throat, an arm lock that ended with a crack. The taller one managed to draw a knife, but Enzo redirected the blade and drove an elbow into the man's temple. Both crumpled, disabled, but breathing. The whole encounter lasted seconds, efficient and brutal as machinery. Ivy had stumbled backward during the fight, scraping her palm on the rough brick wall. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her expression composed. No screaming, no running. Neither would help her now. Enzo approached slowly, as if afraid of startling her. Blood speckled his white shirt cuff, a stark contrast to his otherwise immaculate appearance. His men emerged from the SUV, silently collecting the fallen Leone soldiers. May I? He held out his hand, palm up, an invitation rather than a demand. She showed him her scraped palm, noting how his touch was surprisingly gentle as he examined the shallow cuts. His hands were warm, the fingers long and elegant, despite the calluses that spoke of violence. He produced a handkerchief from his pocket, carefully dabbing at the tiny beads of blood. I won't be claimed, she said firmly, finding her voice despite the adrenaline still coursing through her system. Not by you, not by anyone. Enzo's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or respect. Your terms? Ivy pulled a napkin from her apron and a pen from her pocket. Her handwriting was steady as she wrote, each line a boundary she refused to cross. Medical decisions remain mine alone. 2 semesters of Jonas's tuition paid in advance. Right to refuse marriage, continue working day shift at diner. She held out the napkin. Enzo read it carefully, then produced an expensive pen from his jacket. The fountain pen looked out of place in the grimy alley, its gold nib catching the faint light. I accept, with one addition, he wrote beneath her list. You'll stay in my penthouse. Tonight's visit proves you're already perceived as valuable to me. That makes you a target. Ivy stared at his elegant signature below the terms. This impromptu contract, written on a diner napkin beside a garbage dumpster, now controlled her future. I need to pack some things. Of course. He gestured to the SUV, where a driver held the back door open. The dashboard clock read 8:47 p.m. The interior was leather and polished wood, luxury that seemed from another world entirely. Her apartment took minutes to pack. Some clothes, toiletries, her mother's locket, Jonas's latest letter from college. She grabbed her worn paperback from the nightstand and the framed photo of her and Jonas at his high school graduation. The backpack felt too light for such a momentous change. She locked the door behind her, unsure when she'd return. The elevator ride was silent, numbers climbing, 40, 50, 60. Ivy's reflection in the polished doors looked small next to Enzo's tall frame. She caught him watching her in the mirrored surface, his gaze intent but unreadable. She thought of the violence in the alley, so at odds with his gentle examination of her hand. The same contradictions she'd read about that morning, brutality and beneficence, threat and protection. At 9:11 p.m., the elevator doors opened onto the 83rd floor. Ivy clutched her backpack strap tighter, standing on the threshold of a decision that would reshape her entire world. The silence between them held the weight of everything unsaid, everything yet to come. Before her stretched a hallway of marble and subtle lighting, leading to a life she never imagined entering. The penthouse doors whispered open, revealing a space that straddled luxury and security. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the glittering city below, but Ivy's trained eye caught the subtle reinforcement in the glass, the discreet cameras nestled in crown molding, the keypads beside every door. The tour? Enzo gestured ahead, his presence somehow both commanding and carefully distant. The main living area breathed understated wealth, Italian leather, hand-woven rugs, art that probably cost more than she'd make in a decade. The kitchen gleamed with professional-grade appliances she itched to explore. A hallway led to what appeared to be a private wing, while another curved toward what he called the practical spaces. The first door revealed a fully equipped medical room, complete with an ultrasound machine that made Ivy's stomach clench. "You're very prepared." "Discretion is essential in my position." His tone was matter-of-fact. "Medical care included." The next room stopped her cold. Soft gray walls, clearly freshly painted, caught the city lights streaming through another wall of windows. Against the far wall, 2 identical boxes leaned, flat-packed cribs, their assembly instructions still sealed. "Twins," she said flatly, anger rising. "You didn't just want an heir, you're banking on twins." Enzo's expression remained composed. "They run in my family. The elders believe..." "Believe what? That I'm some kind of breeding machine you can program for doubles? That twins born by winter will end the war." He spoke carefully, watching her reaction. "The timing and circumstances align with an old prophecy." "Prophecy?" Ivy barked out a laugh. "You run half the city's legitimate businesses and probably all the illegitimate ones, but you're making life decisions based on superstition?" She turned toward the elevator, fury propelling her forward when her phone buzzed. A notification showed a trending video from a local night spot. Her fingers shook as she pressed play. There sat Beck, her ex-fiancé, holding court at a rooftop bar she recognized. Around him lounged men she'd seen in photos connected to Corrado Leone. Beck's familiar laugh rang out as he gestured with his drink. "The diner girl who thinks she can play queen." His words slurred slightly. "Like Cinderella with a coffee pot, right? But see, I know her. When things get real, she folds. Always has." Ivy's free hand clenched into a fist, nails biting her palm. The video continued, Beck sharing details of their relationship, spinning every vulnerability she'd ever shown him into ammunition. The men around him laughed, one raising a toast to Enzo's little waitress. She felt Enzo's presence behind her before he spoke. "The elevator keycard works both ways." His voice was quiet, neutral. "Leave if you want. Just know they are waiting for you down there." Thunder rolled outside at 10:26, nature's punctuation to his warning. Ivy stared at the keycard in her hand, mind racing. Beck had always been petty, but this alliance with Corrado's people was calculated. He was using their history to curry favor, making himself valuable by offering inside knowledge about her. "I need to text Kim about my morning shift," she said finally, proud of how steady her voice remained. The message was brief. "Family emergency, need coverage, will explain later." Enzo showed her to the guest suite, another exercise in restrained luxury with its king-sized bed and private bathroom. "My room is down the hall if you need anything. The kitchen is fully stocked. Make yourself at home." Home. The word felt wrong in this glass fortress with its medical room and waiting cribs. Yet her tiny apartment wasn't safe anymore, not with Beck feeding information to Corrado's people. Close to midnight, Ivy lay awake, watching rain slash against the windows. City lights flickered across her ceiling like nervous stars. The keycard sat warm in her palm. She'd been clutching it so long, her body heat had chased away its metallic chill. She thought of Beck's sneering face in the video, how easily he'd weaponized their past. She thought of the gray room with its waiting cribs, Enzo's certainty about twins. She thought of the precise violence in the alley, how those same hands had gentle checked her scrapes. The rain intensified, drumming against the glass like urgent fingers. Below, the city stretched out, a maze of lights and shadows where threats could hide in either. Up here, in this strange blend of luxury and fortress, she was simultaneously trapped and protected. The keycard remained warm in her hand, a reminder that she had a choice, even if every option came with its own price. Outside, lightning split the sky, illuminating clouds heavy with more storms to come. The pre-dawn light cast a blue sheen through the penthouse windows as Ivy scrolled through her phone, her stomach tightening with each message. Her landlord's text glowed harsh against the dim room. "Due to recent circumstances and concerns about property values, your month-to-month lease won't be renewed. Please vacate by Friday." She clicked through to local gossip sites, finding blurry photos of herself entering the penthouse, speculation about her seducing Enzo for money, wild theories about gold-digging schemes. The diner's group chat, usually alive with shift swaps and friendly banter, had gone silent. The few messages there were skirted around her name like it was toxic. Ivy set her phone down, pressing her palms against the cool marble counter. She wouldn't be driven to Enzo's fortress like a scared rabbit. If she was going to stay here, it would be her choice, not because she was chased there. By midday, she stood outside her soon-to-be former apartment building, having slipped past the lobby camera with practiced ease. The familiar walk up 3 flights of stairs felt different now. Final. Inside, she moved. Efficiently, packing 2 decades of life into 2 suitcases. Clothes, essential documents, her mother's recipe cards. A shoebox of memories. Photos, letters, the dried corsage from her high school graduation that Jonas had saved up to buy. The rest, the shabby furniture she'd collected piece by piece, the mismatched dishes, the potted plants on the windowsill. She left behind. They belonged to a different life now. On the sidewalk, dragging her suitcases behind her, a gray sedan crawled past. The passenger window lowered just enough for the glint of a camera lens. Click, click, click. More fodder for the rumor mill. Ivy lifted her chin and kept walking, her heart hammering against her ribs. The penthouse felt different when she returned, less like a gilded cage and more like a fortress she'd chosen to enter. Enzo was waiting, his usual sharp suit at odds with the gentle concern in his eyes. "Your things?" he asked. "What matters?" she replied, wheeling the suitcases toward her room. He followed, keeping a careful distance. "I have a proposal." Ivy turned, bracing herself. Another demand wrapped in choice? A practical solution. He withdrew a small velvet box from his pocket. Marriage, for protection, 1 year. She stared at the box, not reaching for it. And then, "If by winter's end you don't want this, want me, you walk away. The condo I'll put in your name stays yours. A trust fund for the twins ensures their future." His voice remained steady, businesslike. No strings beyond their care. The proposal hung between them, oddly reasonable in its cold logic. Ivy studied his face, searching for the trap, the hidden clause that would bind her beyond escape. "Why marriage?" she asked finally. "The twins don't need that." "Because a wife has legal protections, a surrogate doesn't. Because my enemies would think twice about touching my family. Because—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Because I want to offer you more than a contract." Evening settled around them as they picked at takeout containers on the kitchen island, the city lights creating a glittering backdrop to their stiff politeness. The ring box sat unopened between them, a black velvet boundary line. "The diner," Ivy said at 8:15, breaking the careful silence. "I need to clear out my locker tomorrow. I'll have security." "No." She set down her chopsticks. "I go alone, on my terms, to say goodbye properly." Enzo studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. "A car will wait nearby, just in case." At 9:03, Ivy picked up the ring box, its weight surprising in her palm. Without opening it, she slipped it into her pocket. "Tomorrow," she said. "I'm going to the diner to pack my locker and say goodbye on my terms." The space between them filled with unspoken words, his concern, her determination, the strange dance they were learning around each other's boundaries. The city hummed beyond the windows, a constant reminder of the world waiting to pass, judgment on whatever choice she made. The velvet box pressed against her thigh through her pocket, heavy with possibility and constraint. She'd known from the moment in the alley that her old life was ending, but now she was choosing how to step into the new one. Not running, not being chased, but walking forward with her eyes open. The remnants of their dinner sat between them, a mundane detail in an extraordinary situation. Enzo began clearing the containers, his movements precise and controlled as always. But there was something else there too, a carefulness in how he maintained the distance she set, a respect for the boundaries she drew, even as circumstances pushed them closer together. The penthouse felt different now, with her suitcases tucked away in her room, her few possessions marking space in this pristine environment. Not home, not yet, maybe never, but a fortress of her choosing, at least for now. At 9:30 a.m., sunlight streamed through the diner's windows, casting long shadows across the empty booths. Ivy stood in the parking lot, her arms crossed as she faced Enzo. 5 minutes, she insisted. "That's all I need to clear my locker." Enzo's jaw tightened, his dark eyes scanning the quiet street. 3 cars. My men at every exit. Timer starts the moment you step inside. 2 black SUVs and a sedan formed a protective triangle around the diner. Men in dark suits positioned themselves strategically, one by the front door, 2 covering the back, others monitoring from their vehicles. Ivy walked through the familiar, bell-chimed entrance, the scent of coffee and maple syrup hitting her with a wave of nostalgia. The morning rush had ended, leaving only a few regulars nursing their cups in corner booths. Marco, the busboy who'd worked alongside her for the past year, intercepted her path to the employee area. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Ivy, there's been guys asking about you. Not regulars. They wanted your schedule when you work alone." Her heart skipped, but she kept her voice steady. "When?" "Yesterday. And again this morning. Real nasty-looking types." She quickened her pace to the locker room, grabbing her few belongings, the spare uniform, family photos taped inside the door, her emergency makeup kit. As she stuffed her favorite apron into her bag, a shadow darkened the back doorway. 2 men burst in, faces twisted with malice, knives glinting in the fluorescent light. The taller one sneered. "Corrado sends his regards, says your pretty face needs to deliver a message to Enzo." Ivy backed toward the industrial kitchen, her hand finding a heavy pot lid. Her fingers curled around its steel rim as adrenaline sharpened her senses. The men advanced, their movements predatory. "Come here, princess," the shorter one taunted. "This'll hurt less if you don't fight." She raised the lid, like a shield, her back pressed against the cold, stainless steel counter. The first slash came fast. She deflected it with the lid. The screech of metal on metal piercing the air. The second attacker lunged, but she ducked, years of waitressing having honed her reflexes for tight spaces. The kitchen door exploded inward. Enzo moved like a dark blur, his movements precise and lethal. He caught the first man's knife hand, twisting until bones cracked. The second attacker barely turned before Enzo's elbow connected with his throat, dropping him to his knees. The third move was almost too fast to follow, a sweep that sent both men sprawling as Enzo's security team rushed in to pin them down. Enzo reached Ivy in 2 strides, his body caging her against the counter, shielding her from view as his men secured the attackers. His hands ghosted over her arms, checking for injuries. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, still clutching the pot lid. I'm okay. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. By 9:47 a.m., red and blue lights flooded the parking lot. Enzo's lawyer appeared as if summoned by magic, handling statements and questions with practiced efficiency. Ivy noticed she was shaking only when Enzo shrugged off his dress shirt, leaving him in a fitted black undershirt. He draped the warm fabric around her shoulders, his touch gentle despite the violence still evident in his tense posture. Her manager hovered nearby, wringing his hands. Enzo turned to him, voice cool and professional. "The debt is cleared, all of it. The diner's yours free and clear." "Mr. Valente, I never meant. It's done." Enzo's tone left no room for discussion. His hand settled on the small of Ivy's back, guiding her toward the exit. The convoy reorganized smoothly. Ivy and Enzo in the middle SUV, security vehicles front and back. As they rolled through downtown at 10:22 a.m., Ivy pressed her cheek against the cool window, watching the city blur past. The trembling hadn't stopped. The pot-lid's steel rim had left a red mark across her palm. Her apron lay forgotten on the kitchen floor, along with the last remnants of her normal life. The danger she'd intellectually understood now had faces, had knives, had intent to harm. It wasn't theoretical anymore. Enzo's shirt smelled like expensive cologne and gunpowder. He sat beside her, one hand resting on the seat between them, an offer of comfort without demand. His knuckles were slightly scraped, the only evidence of the fight that had lasted mere seconds. The city rolled by outside, business people hurrying to meetings, tourists taking photos, vendors setting up lunch carts, normal life continuing while her world had shifted on its axis. Again. Her fingers found the ring box still in her pocket from last night. The weight of it felt different now, less like a constraint and more like armor. She hadn't opened it yet, hadn't seen what kind of ring a man like Enzo would choose, but she could feel the choice solidifying in her mind, shaped by steel and survival and the way he'd appeared exactly when she needed him. The SUV glided through traffic, its tinted windows creating a barrier between their world and the ordinary one outside. Security teams communicated in clipped tones through earpieces, coordinating their movement through the city like a well-oiled machine. Ivy's reflection in the window looked strange to her. Enzo's expensive shirt draped over her diner uniform, her hair mussed from the fight, her eyes wider and darker than usual. She watched the familiar landmarks of her old life pass by, knowing she wouldn't see them the same way again. Afternoon light slanted through the penthouse windows as Ivy wandered the halls, her fingers still trembling from the morning's events. She paused at a wall she hadn't noticed before. Dozens of framed photographs hung in neat rows, each telling a story of hope. Children with wrapped hands threw punches at hanging bags, their faces intense with concentration. Teenagers in graduation caps clutched scholarship certificates, beaming beside a younger Enzo, who looked proud but uncomfortable with the camera's attention. A recent photo showed kids playing soccer on a maintained field that, according to the plaque, had once been an abandoned lot. Her attention caught on a flyer pinned between frames: tomorrow's charity picnic at Roosevelt Park. The event promised food, games, and a boxing demonstration for the youth program's families. It seemed surreal that such normal activities existed in Enzo's world. The elevator's soft chime announced his return. Ivy turned to find him striding in, jacket off, tie loosened, and fury radiating from his rigid posture. But his anger wasn't directed outward. She recognized the self-recrimination in his clenched jaw. "It wasn't your fault," she said quietly. "I shouldn't have allowed that risk." His voice was controlled, but his knuckles were white where he gripped his phone. 5 minutes. I gave them a 5-minute window to hurt you. You came through that door exactly when I needed you. I should have been there before they entered." He paced the length of the windows, agitation visible in every line of his body. "The diner should have been swept, secured, and I would have felt like a prisoner instead of someone making my own choice to leave." Ivy stepped into his path, forcing him to stop. "You can't control everything." His dark eyes met hers, conflicted. "In my world, lack of control gets people killed." The next afternoon found them at Roosevelt Park, sunshine warming the neat grass and playgrounds. Ivy helped distribute juice boxes and sandwiches to excited kids, while Enzo moved through the crowd with careful attention, remembering names and asking about school grades. At 3:10 p.m., a shout of alarm cut through the cheerful chaos. A small boy had broken away from the group, chasing a ball toward the street. Ivy's heart stopped as she saw the delivery van approaching too fast. Enzo moved like lightning. He vaulted over a decorative barrier, reaching the child in 3 long strides. His hand closed on the boy's collar, yanking him backward just as the van roared past. But his momentum carried him into a metal sign bracket jutting from a post. The jagged edge caught his shoulder, tearing through his shirt. Security swarmed, parents gathered their children, and the picnic dispersed in organized waves while Enzo assured the crying boy's mother that everything was fine. Only Ivy noticed how he held his arm carefully still, blood darkening his sleeve. Back in the penthouse clinic at 4:02 p.m., Ivy snapped on latex gloves and examined the wound while Enzo sat on the gurney, his ruined shirt discarded. The gash was deep but clean. Nothing vital damaged, but it needed stitches. "I can call your doctor," she offered, preparing the anesthetic. "I trust your hands." His voice was steady despite his white-knuckled grip on the gurney's edge. As she worked, his breathing remained controlled, but tension radiated from his bare shoulders. Whether from pain or something else, she couldn't tell. "The winter deadline," he said suddenly, staring at the opposite wall. "It's not just about heirs or prophecies." Ivy kept her movement steady as she placed another careful stitch. "Tell me." "My mother's heart is failing. The treatments aren't working anymore." Raw emotion roughened his voice. "The council, they're circling. Without clear succession, they'll vote me out the moment she's gone. Benedict Rosso is already moving pieces." "The elder who always smiles?" Ivy had seen him at the diner, treating staff like furniture. "He's arranged a marriage contract with Corrado's niece. Political alliance to stabilize the territory." Enzo's lip curled. "If I don't produce heirs by winter, the council will force the match." Ivy tied off the last stitch, understanding clicking into place. "That's why you came to the diner that night. You needed to choose before they chose for you. I needed someone strong enough to survive this world without becoming it." His eyes finally met hers. "Someone who would protect our children from becoming weapons in their games." She cleaned the stitches in silence, processing the weight of his words. The twins weren't just about prophecies or power. They were his chance to build something real, something that couldn't be twisted by council politics. The rest of the evening passed in quiet routine. Ivy insisted he take pain medication, which made him drowsy, despite his protests. She sat in the armchair by his bed, watching the city lights shimmer through the windows while he slept. Around 11:20 p.m., her own eyes grew heavy. The day's adrenaline caught up with her, and she drifted off in the comfortable chair, lulled by the soft sound of Enzo's breathing and the distant hum of traffic below. She woke at 2:03 a.m. to find a blanket tucked carefully around her shoulders, one she definitely hadn't pulled up herself. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city's glow was muted by fog, turning the familiar skyline into something softer, almost dreamlike. Enzo slept soundly, his injured shoulder carefully positioned. In sleep, the sharp edges of his power smoothed away, leaving just a man who had saved a child without hesitation, who funded scholarships instead of buying yachts, who covered her with a blanket while she slept. The penthouse buzzed with preparation at 7 p.m. Security teams moved with practiced efficiency, checking routes and contingencies for the Lorenzo Foundation's annual gala. Ivy stood before the mirror in her temporary bedroom, studying her reflection with a mix of determination and doubt. She'd sworn she wouldn't touch the wardrobe Enzo had filled for her, but practicality won over pride. The black dress she'd chosen was elegant in its simplicity, fitted through the bodice with a flowing skirt that kissed the floor. She'd spent the afternoon taking it in at the waist and shoulders, her old waitressing uniform still hanging in the closet like a reminder of the life she'd left behind. 3 cars, Marco, the head of security, explained as they gathered in the foyer. Different routes, same arrival time. Ms. Hale rides with the boss. Ivy's heels clicked against marble as she approached Enzo, who stood by the elevator in a perfectly tailored black suit. His eyes tracked her movement, lingering on the precise stitching at her waist where she'd altered the dress. "You sew," he observed, offering his arm. "Necessity teaches many skills." She accepted the support, careful of his healing shoulder. The ride to the venue passed in tense silence. Ivy watched the city blur past bulletproof windows, mentally rehearsing the evening ahead. Show strength, stay close, trust no one. The gala sparkled with old money and new ambition. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow fragments across marble floors, while security teams, masked as waiters, patrolled the edges. Ivy recognized faces from the news, politicians, business leaders, and more than a few who walked the line between legitimate and shadow enterprises. At 8:11 p.m., movement on the mezzanine caught her eye. Beck stood with 2 of Corrado's men, his cheap suit and cheaper smile, a reminder of why she'd ended their engagement. But it was what dangled from his fingers that made her breath catch. Her mother's silver necklace, the delicate chain catching the light. "Look what I found at auction," Beck called down, voice carrying just far enough to draw attention. "Seems someone was desperate enough to pawn a family heirloom. Wonder what else she'd sell." Enzo's hand tightened on her waist, but Ivy touched his arm in warning. She'd seen that possessive anger before. It would only feed the gossip Beck wanted to create. The charity portion of the evening began, with various items up for donation. Ivy watched Enzo's expression, knew he was calculating how to buy everything just to get her necklace back. But that would look like exactly what it was, a powerful man throwing money at her problem. Instead, Ivy walked to the microphone during a pause between items. The spotlight found her, and she lifted her chin. "That silver necklace being passed around up there?" Her voice carried clear and steady. "It belonged to my mother. She left it to me when she died, along with hospital bills and a brother to put through college. 3 months ago, I pawned it to cover rent and keep food on our table." The room had gone silent, all eyes on her. Beck's smirk faltered. "I'm not ashamed of that choice. My mother taught me that family comes before pride and that honest work matters more than appearances." She smiled at the gathered crowd. "So, I'm asking whoever bought it, would you consider donating it back? Not because anyone demanded it, but because sometimes kindness matters more than winning." Applause rippled through the room. An elegant woman in her 60s stood, the necklace gleaming in her hand. "My dear, I would be honored to return this to you. Some things shouldn't be used as weapons." Ivy accepted the necklace with grace, letting the older woman clasp it around her neck. The cool silver settled against her skin like a piece of home restored. Later, on the second-floor balcony, Enzo found her watching the city lights. "That was well played," he said softly. "It wasn't a play." She turned to face him. "I meant every word." "I know." His hand came up to trace the silver chain, fingers brushing her collarbone. That's what made it powerful. The kiss, when it came, was both calculated and inevitable. His lips met hers with careful heat, one hand cupping her face, while the other drew her closer. Camera flashes erupted from below. The moment would be headlines by morning, pushing the delicate balance between families into open conflict. But Ivy barely registered the cameras. She was too caught in the contradiction of Enzo's kiss, the public display of affection masking something far more private, more real. His thumb stroked her cheek with a gentleness that had nothing to do with their audience. When they finally broke apart, the world rushed back in. Security materialized to escort them through the crowd and into the waiting car. At 9:05 p.m., they rode through the city in silence, the armored vehicle humming steadily beneath them. Ivy touched the necklace, watching streetlights paint patterns across Enzo's face. There were words building in her throat, questions about the kiss, about what was real and what was theater, about the war they'd just escalated. But she swallowed them back, afraid to name the shift she felt happening between them. Enzo stared straight ahead, his profile carved in shadow and light. His hand rested on the seat between them, close enough to touch, but carefully still. The engine's steady vibration filled the space where their voices should have been, carrying them through the night while unspoken truths hung heavy in the air. The city rolled past outside, oblivious to the changes set in motion. In less than 12 hours, photos would flood social media, rumors would ignite, and battle lines would be drawn. But for now, in the quiet of the car, Ivy and Enzo let the silence hold what neither was ready to voice. The penthouse felt different at 10:40 p.m., charged with unspoken tension from the gala. Ivy stood at the window, her mother's necklace catching city lights, while Enzo watched her from across the room. The balcony kiss had cracked something open between them, something neither could ignore anymore. "You didn't have to defend me tonight," she said, turning to face him. "You didn't need defending. You handled it perfectly." He moved closer, drawn like gravity. "And that's what makes you dangerous, Ivy. You find your own solutions." She closed the distance between them, heart racing. "Is that what I am? Dangerous?" His fingers traced the silver chain brushing her skin. "To me? Absolutely." This time when they kissed, there were no cameras, no audience, just the electric current that had been building since that first night in the diner. Ivy rose on her toes, hands sliding into his hair, and Enzo made a sound low in his throat. He lifted her easily, her legs wrapping around his waist as he carried her to the bedroom. They undressed each other slowly, consent in every touch, every pause. Ivy pushed him back against the sheets, taking control, and his eyes darkened with heat. "Tell me what you want," he murmured. "You," she answered simply. "Just you." Their bodies came together with desperate tenderness, Enzo treating her like she was precious but not fragile. His hands mapped her skin like he was memorizing her, and Ivy matched his intensity with her own. They moved together until pleasure crashed through them both, leaving them breathless and tangled in the sheets. Later, in the quiet dark, vulnerability crept in. Ivy traced old scars on his chest. "Tell me about your father," she whispered. Enzo's hand stilled in her hair. "He ruled by fear. Beat my mother, terrorized everyone. I swore I'd never become him." "Is that why you fund the youth programs?" "Partly. Breaking cycles matters." He kissed her temple. "Your turn. Tell me about your mother." Ivy's throat tightened. "Cancer took her fast. I was 19. Jonas was 14. I dropped out of college to work double shifts, keep him in school. You've been carrying everyone else for so long." His arms tightened around her. "Let someone carry you for a while." She propped herself up on an elbow, studying his face. "The twins thing, it scared me at first. Felt like a trap." "Never meant it as one." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "The elders believe twins will bring peace, yes. But I want children with you because you're you, not because of prophecies." Ivy smiled softly. "My grandmother was a twin, actually. She always said it was magic, having someone who knew your soul from the start." "See, the universe conspires." He pulled her close again, and they lost, themselves and each other until exhaustion finally claimed them. The crack of impact at 6:18 a.m. jolted them awake. Spiderweb patterns bloomed across the ballistic glass where a sniper round had struck. Alarms blared as security burst in. "Down!" Enzo rolled them both off the bed as another shot hit higher up. He grabbed pants while guards hustled them toward a concealed panel in the wall. The safe room was a fortress within the fortress. Steel-lined walls, multiple camera feeds, emergency supplies. They watched on monitors as tactical teams swept to neighboring buildings, tracking the shooter's likely position. "They're getting bolder," Enzo growled, pacing the confined space. He wore only his pants, chest bare and muscles coiled with tension. Ivy pulled his shirt around herself, watching the feeds. "Because of last night? The kiss? Because you make me vulnerable." He stopped pacing, ran a hand through his hair. "They'll use that." "I'm not afraid." "You should be." "No." She caught his hand. "Fear is what they want. I won't give it to them." Dawn crept across the city on the screens, painting everything in pale gold. By 8:30 a.m., they'd relocated to a windowless suite deeper in the penthouse. less exposed, more defensible. Ivy watched Enzo coordinate with security teams, saw the weight on his shoulders. At 9:02 a.m., she laced her fingers through his, squeezing gently. "If they think I'll break, they don't know me." His eyes met hers, fierce and protective. "No, they don't know you at all." She touched the silver chain at her neck, thinking of choices and consequences. Last night had changed everything. Not just between them, but in the wider war. The sniper was proof that their enemies saw her as Enzo's weakness. But as she stood in the fortified room, holding the hand of a man who could level cities but touched her like she was precious, Ivy knew they had it wrong. Love wasn't weakness. It was armor, strength, reason to fight harder. She wouldn't run, wouldn't hide, wouldn't let fear rule her choices. The morning light filtered through hidden ventilation shafts, catching the silver of her mother's necklace. Ivy touched it gently, remembering last night's intimacies, the way Enzo had opened up about his past, how natural it felt to share her own hurts. The twins no longer felt like a bargaining chip, but a possibility, a future they might choose together. Security teams moved efficiently through their protocols, checking and double-checking defensive positions. Enzo's phone buzzed constantly with updates, but he kept his hand in hers, thumb stroking her knuckles in absent comfort. They'd found their way to each other through threats and conditions, but somewhere between that first night in the diner and this morning's violence, everything had shifted. Late morning sun filtered through reinforced windows as Enzo's inner circle gathered in the penthouse's secure conference room. 6 of his most trusted captains sat around the mahogany table, faces grim, as their boss laid out surveillance photos from the morning's attack. "The shooter's position suggests inside knowledge," Enzo said, his voice controlled but lethal. They knew exactly when security rotations changed. That information is restricted to council calendars. Marco, his head of security, spread out building blueprints. The timing aligned perfectly with the shift change noted in Benedict Rosso's private schedule. Ivy studied the older man's photograph on the screen. Benedict's smile didn't reach his cold eyes. She'd seen that same calculated look on Beck's face before he betrayed her. "Benedict's been pushing for a political marriage to Corrado's niece," Enzo continued. "He claims it would end the war. What he really wants is to control both families through proxy." "And if you produced heirs first," one captain began. "His plan falls apart," Enzo finished, "which makes Ivy a target." She felt their eyes shift to her, measuring. These men had sworn loyalty to Enzo, but she was still an outsider, the waitress who'd stumbled into their world. "I have a suggestion," Ivy said, straightening in her chair. "We announce our engagement, publicly, today." The room went silent. Enzo turned to her, expression careful. "You're sure that's what you want?" "I want to control the narrative," she replied firmly. "Right now, I'm just the woman you're protecting. An engagement sends a different message, that I chose this, chose you. It rallies your allies and cuts off Benedict's leverage." "She's right," Marco said. "A clear succession through marriage and heirs would strengthen our position." Enzo dismissed the others, leaving them alone in the sunlit room. He studied her face. "This isn't how I wanted to propose." "Life rarely goes as planned." Ivy smiled softly. "But I'm choosing this, choosing you, not because of threats or prophecies, but because I want a future with you, one where our children are safe." At 1:15 p.m., Enzo led her to the penthouse library. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined the walls, leather-bound volumes creating a sanctuary of knowledge and quiet. He retrieved an antique box from a hidden safe. Kneeling before her, he opened it to reveal a platinum ring. The Valente family crest was worked into the setting, surrounding a deep blue sapphire. "This was my grandmother's. She made my father swear that it would only go to someone worthy of trust, not just obedience." His eyes met hers. "I promise you now, the crown will never be used against you. We rule together or not at all." Ivy's heart thundered as she extended her hand. Together. The ring slid onto her finger, a perfect fit. Enzo pressed his lips to her knuckles, then drew her into a kiss that felt like sealing a pact. By 3:40 p.m., their official engagement photo dominated local news feeds. They'd posed in the library, Ivy in a cream silk blouse that offset the sapphire ring, Enzo standing protectively behind her with one hand on her shoulder. The message was clear. She wasn't a victim or a pawn, but a chosen queen. Their phones buzzed constantly with messages from allies pledging support. Benedict's faction stayed tellingly silent. At 6:00 p.m., trusted captains gathered for dinner in the penthouse dining room. Security plans were laid out between courses, covering tomorrow's prenatal appointment from every angle. "The clinic's been swept," Marco reported. "Private entrance, skeleton staff we've vetted personally. Dr. Chen will perform the ultrasound herself." Ivy listened as they mapped escape routes and backup protocols. The reality of constant threats should have terrified her, but instead she felt oddly calm. These men would die to protect her and the possible lives she carried. Not out of fear, but loyalty to the future she and Enzo represented. After dinner, she stood in the clinic doorway, studying the ultrasound machine. Tomorrow would make everything real. The pregnancy, the twins, the destiny everyone seemed so certain about. She pinned their engagement announcement to the corkboard, right beside her medical charts. The photo caught the exact moment Enzo had squeezed her shoulder in silent support. They looked like partners, equals despite their different worlds. The sapphire gleamed on her finger as she touched the image. "Tomorrow we check," she whispered at 10:32 p.m., hope and determination mingling in her chest. Behind her, Enzo wrapped his arms around her waist, chin resting on her shoulder as he studied the photo. "Whatever happens tomorrow, nothing changes between us." She leaned back against him, feeling the steady beat of his heart. The ring caught the light, its weight already familiar on her hand. In just over a week, she'd gone from serving coffee to stepping into a war. But here in this moment, with his arms around her and their future taking shape, she felt no regrets. The clinic room waited, pristine and ready. Security teams patrolled below. Somewhere in the city, their enemies plotted. But Ivy had made her choice, not just to survive, but to fight for the life she wanted. Tomorrow would bring its own battles, but tonight she stood in her fiancé's embrace, watching city lights sparkle through bulletproof glass, feeling strangely at peace with whatever came next. Their engagement photo smiled down from the corkboard, a promise made public. The sapphire ring caught the light, marking her not as claimed, but as chosen, equal partner in the path ahead. At 9 a.m., the private clinic's lights hummed softly overhead as Ivy settled onto the padded exam table. The paper crinkled beneath her as Dr. Chen squeezed clear gel onto her still flat stomach. Enzo sat in the perfect spot, close enough to grip her fingers, far enough to give the technician space to work. "Try to relax," Dr. Chen murmured, moving the wand in slow circles. Ivy stared at the ceiling, barely breathing. After everything, the threats, the marriage deadline, the political maneuvering, this moment would make it all real. Enzo's thumb traced circles on her palm, his own tension visible only in the tight set of his jaw. The room filled with a rhythmic swooshing sound, like waves against a shore. Dr. Chen adjusted some settings, moved the wand slightly left, and then a smile broke across her face. She turned the screen toward them. "There," she said, pointing to 2 distinct flickering spots. 2 strong heartbeats. Ivy's free hand flew to her mouth. On the grainy screen, 2 tiny lives pulsed with impossible strength. Twins, just as everyone had predicted, just as Enzo had known somehow. She turned to share the moment with him, but Enzo, the man who could face down assassins without flinching, had crumpled. His forehead pressed against her belly, shoulders shaking slightly as he whispered in Italian. "I will protect you," he vowed, voice rough. "All of you, with everything I am." Dr. Chen quietly printed photos and slipped out, giving them privacy. Ivy ran her fingers through Enzo's dark hair as he composed himself. When he finally looked up, his eyes were wet, but fierce with determination. "You've given me everything," he said softly. They spent the next hour reviewing prenatal care instructions and scheduling future appointments. Security teams swept the building again before they prepared to leave. At 10:27 a.m., they made their way through the underground garage, avoiding the photographers camped outside the clinic's main entrance. Enzo's hand rested protectively at the small of her back as they walked toward the waiting SUV. Ivy's phone buzzed. A text from Beck appeared. "I have something of yours. One last thing. Let me return it properly." Her finger hovered over the delete button when a maintenance door slammed behind them. Before security could react, a panel van screeched around the corner. The side door flew open. Rough hands grabbed her arms. Something sweet-smelling pressed over her mouth and nose. She tried to scream, to fight, but her limbs wouldn't respond. The last thing she saw was Enzo lunging forward as darkness took her. At 10:35 a.m., Enzo's phone chimed. The image made his blood freeze. Ivy slumped unconscious in a metal chair, zip ties cutting into her wrists. The warehouse behind her was industrial, waterfront. He recognized the distinctive rust-streaked support beams. A digital clock and frame showed 2:00 p.m., a deadline, and a taunt. The address followed in a second message. Corrado's signature was all over this. The timing, the location, the theatrical staging. But Beck's involvement meant this was personal, not just business. Enzo's voice turned to ice as he activated his command channel. All teams mobilize. Protocol red. He rattled off assignments rapid fire, coordinating a multi-pronged assault. Some would create diversions, others would secure escape routes, while his most trusted squad would go in with him. Marco appeared at his side with tactical gear. Sniper teams are moving into position. We'll have eyes on all approaches within 30 minutes. Triple the waterfront patrol, Enzo ordered. No boats leave that sector without our approval. He pulled up building schematics on a tablet, marking entry points and potential ambush locations. By 11 a.m., Enzo stood in his private armory, methodically preparing. He shrugged into a sleek suit jacket, cut to conceal the low-profile ballistic vest underneath. Checking his pistol with practiced efficiency, he slid it into the custom shoulder holster. His reflection in the mirrored wall showed a man transformed. Gone was the gentle soul who had wept at seeing his children's heartbeats. In his place stood the Don, who had clawed his way to power through blood and iron will. His eyes held the cold promise of vengeance as he walked toward the elevator. The security team parted before him, recognizing the lethal intent radiating from their leader. This wasn't just about business anymore. They had taken his pregnant fiancée, the mother of his heirs, the woman who had changed everything. The rules of engagement were simple now. Anyone between him and Ivy would not survive the day. The elevator doors slid open. Enzo stepped inside, murder written in every line of his body. He had 3 hours to bring hell to his enemy's doorstep. 3 hours to remind them why the Valente name was whispered in fear. 3 hours to get Ivy back or paint the docks red trying. The port's security cameras swept empty loading zones at 1:12 p.m. as Enzo moved like a shadow between shipping containers. A flash drive of offshore accounts had convinced the camera operator to create a 15-minute loop. Corrado's driver, facing trafficking charges, had drawn a detailed map of guard positions in exchange for witness protection and a new identity far from the docks. Enzo touched his earpiece. Hold positions. No one moves without my signal. His teams were staged a block away, ready to lock down escape routes. But he wouldn't risk stray bullets around Ivy and the twins. This had to be precise, contained. The warehouse loomed ahead, rust bleeding down its corrugated walls. Enzo counted heartbeats, imagining Ivy's synchronized with their children's. The mental rhythm steadied his hands as he picked the service door's lock. Inside, stale air carried the scent of motor oil and salt. His shoes made no sound on the concrete as he ghosted past empty offices. A guard's radio crackled around the corner. Enzo pressed against the wall, waiting. The guard passed within arm's reach. One fluid motion, grab, twist, knife, and the body slumped silently. Enzo dragged it into a supply closet, continuing his measured advance. A shot cracked past his shoulder, sparking off metal. Enzo dropped and rolled, coming up behind a forklift. As return fire peppered his position, he placed adhesive charges near exposed gas lines. Insurance, if things went wrong. The shooter's boots scraped. Concrete. Repositioning. Enzo counted steps, then surged around the corner. His knife found the man's throat before the gun could track. 2 down, he whispered to his teams. Maintain perimeter. He moved deeper into the warehouse, drawn by an almost physical pull toward where he knew Ivy waited. Past stacked pallets and abandoned machinery, following the sound of voices echoing off high ceilings. At 1:58 p.m., he reached a cleared area near loading bay doors. Ivy sat zip-tied to a metal chair, duct tape across her mouth. Her eyes widened at his approach, but showed no fear, only cold determination. Enzo's knife made quick work of her bonds. As he peeled the tape gently from her lips, movement flashed in his peripheral vision. Stop! Beck stumbled from behind a support column, gun shaking in his hands. Corrado promised me a percentage, said I just had to prove she was your weakness. Ivy stood slowly, Enzo's arm around her waist. You don't get to decide my worth anymore, she said, voice steady despite her racing pulse against Enzo's side. Beck's face twisted. You think you're so much better than me now? Playing queen to his king? The gun wavered between them. No, Enzo said softly. She was always better. You were just too small to see it. Instead of the bullet Beck deserved, Enzo pulled a burner drive from his pocket and tossed it toward the loading doors. Right on cue, his lawyer stepped into view with 2 detectives. Financial records, trafficking documentation, recorded calls, Enzo announced. Everything linking Corrado's organization to 3 open RICO investigations. Beck's connection is detailed in folder 6. The detectives moved forward as Beck's gun clattered to the floor. His face crumpled as steel cuffs clicked shut. "You're under arrest," one detective began reading rights while the other bagged the drive as evidence. Enzo guided Ivy toward a side exit, pausing only to trigger the charge's timer. In 20 minutes, the empty back rooms would disappear in controlled demolition, erasing all trace of her captivity. They emerged into afternoon sun at 2:22 p.m. as sirens wailed in the distance. Ivy stumbled slightly, adrenaline fading. Enzo swept her into his arms despite her token protest. "I can walk," she muttered against his chest. "Humor me," he replied, carrying her swiftly between buildings as the first explosion shook the ground behind them. 3 blocks away, they ducked into a secure stairwell at 2:45 p.m. An EMT was already waiting with a medical kit and portable fetal Doppler. "I'm fine," Ivy insisted as the EMT checked her vitals. "They just drugged me to get me in the van. I woke up about an hour ago." "Humor me again," Enzo said, not relaxing until the Doppler picked up 2 distinct heartbeats, strong and steady as drums. Ivy squeezed his hand. "They're fighters, like their father." "And their mother," Enzo corrected, pressing his lips to her temple. He could still feel her pulse racing, but her eyes were clear and focused, already planning their next move, he suspected. The EMT finished her assessment. "Blood pressure's good, pupils normal, some bruising on the wrists, but no serious trauma. I'd still recommend a full checkup once you're somewhere secure." Enzo nodded. "Our doctor is standing by." He helped Ivy to her feet as his phone buzzed with updates. Corrado's web was already unraveling as the evidence spread through law enforcement channels. The old power structure would collapse within days. More explosions rumbled in the distance, his teams demolishing other strategic targets while attention was focused on the main warehouse. Ivy leaned into his side, both of them watching dust clouds rise over the water. "Take me home," she said quietly. "We have nurseries to finish." The simple domesticity of her words, planning for their children while their world realigned, made Enzo's chest tight. He'd gone in ready to kill for her, but she'd chosen justice instead of vengeance, teaching him even now that there were better ways to win. Morning sunlight streamed through the council chamber's stained glass windows, casting jeweled shadows across the polished mahogany table. At precisely 9 a.m., Enzo and Ivy entered together, his injured arm carefully concealed beneath expertly tailored wool. The gathered elders, 12 in total, shifted in their leather chairs like restless crows. Benedict Rosso rose immediately, his silver hair catching the light. "I move for an emergency vote of no confidence," he announced, voice dripping with practiced concern. "Our Don's judgment has been compromised. This dalliance with a waitress has brought war to our door." Several council members nodded, exactly as Benedict had orchestrated. Ivy noticed how their eyes slid past her, dismissing her presence entirely. "Furthermore," Benedict continued, "the attack on our Don's residence, the warehouse incident, all stemming from this ill-advised—" "Projection ready?" Enzo interrupted quietly. The lights dimmed as screens descended from recessed ceiling panels. Transaction logs filled the displays, wire transfers, property deeds, shell company registrations, all bearing Benedict's signature, all tied to Corrado's network. The council chamber erupted in whispers. "These are forgeries!" Benedict sputtered, but his face had gone pale. "My turn," Ivy said, pulling out her phone. Her voice carried clearly across the table as she pressed play. Beck's familiar voice filled the room. "Our friends on the council, especially old Benedict, they want you gone, sweetheart. Once we grab you, Enzo will have to choose. Either step down gracefully or watch his precious twins disappear. Benedict says it's the cleanest way to force the marriage alliance." The recording continued, detailing dates, locations, payments. Benedict's complexion shifted from white to gray as his conspirators edged away from him one by one. "I recorded everything after the first threat," Ivy explained. "I learned young to keep evidence." Enzo remained standing, one hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "The vote, councilors." At 10:20 a.m., hands raised one after another. Benedict's exile passed unanimously. His allies were stripped of their portfolios, their assignments redistributed to those who had remained loyal. "The council recognizes Enzo Valente as rightful Don," the eldest member declared, "and acknowledges his chosen bride as—" He hesitated, clearly unsure of proper protocol. Enzo removed his signet ring, the symbol of his authority, and pressed it into Ivy's palm, closing her fingers around the warm metal. "This is hers to guard as much as mine," he declared. "My queen, my partner, my equal." The council members bowed their heads, accepting the new order. Benedict was escorted out by security, his protest falling on deaf ears. At 10:45 a.m., Enzo and Ivy left the chamber together, climbing the private stairs to the rooftop glass house. Winter sunlight filtered through frosted panels, illuminating the tropical plants that thrived in the climate-controlled space. Their inner circle waited. The captains who had helped raid the warehouse, the tech team who had traced Benedict's paper trail, the doctor who had treated Enzo's wounds, and his lawyer who had orchestrated the evidence handoff to police. These were the ones who had bled for them, fought for them, believed in their vision of a better future. Ivy wore a simple cream dress, her mother's silver necklace at her throat. Enzo had removed his sling, though she could see him favoring the injured arm. They faced each other beneath a blooming arch of orchids as the city judge began the civil ceremony. The vows were brief but meaningful. Ivy spoke of choice and trust, of building something stronger than fear. Enzo promised protection without possession, partnership without demands. "The rings!" the judge prompted at 11:15 a.m. Enzo's signet ring slid onto Ivy's finger, sized perfectly in advance. She placed a plain platinum band on his. Practical, like her, but unbreakable. "By the power vested in me," the judge continued. But Ivy barely heard the words. She was lost in Enzo's eyes, seeing their future reflected there, the twins growing strong and safe, their family's legacy reshaped into something worthy of inheritance. At 11:30 a.m., the judge pronounced them husband and wife. Their witnesses applauded as Enzo drew Ivy close, his kiss a promise kept. The winter sun streamed through the glass panels, warming the tropical air. Outside, the city stretched below them, unaware that its underworld had shifted on its axis. Power had changed hands not through violence, but justice, not through force, but choice. Their inner circle gathered close, offering congratulations and well wishes. These were the ones who understood what had really been won today. Not just a marriage or a council seat, but the chance to build something new from the ashes of the old ways. The doctor discreetly checked Enzo's shoulder while their lawyer reviewed the final marriage documents. Security teams maintained their posts, ever vigilant. But here in this glass-walled sanctuary, surrounded by those who had proved their loyalty, Ivy and Enzo had carved out a moment of peace. They stood together at the glass, his arm around her waist, her head against his shoulder, watching their city sparkle in the winter light. The twins moved beneath her heart, already strong enough to make their presence known. "Mrs. Valente," Enzo murmured, testing the sound of it. Ivy smiled. "Mr. Hale Valente," she corrected, and felt his quiet laugh. Their witnesses began directing staff to set up the small reception they had planned. Nothing elaborate, just food and wine shared with their chosen family. There would be time for grand celebrations later. This moment belonged to those who had fought beside them, who had helped them forge their own path to power. The penthouse glowed with warmth that afternoon, strings of lights casting soft shadows across the long table. Ivy sat beside Enzo, their plates barely touched, as friends and chosen family shared stories, and relief-edged laughter. The war felt distant now, like storm clouds finally breaking. Maria Valente, Enzo's mother, moved carefully to Ivy's side with help from her nurse. Though fragile, her eyes sparkled with life as she pressed a silver charm into Ivy's palm. "For the babies," she whispered in Italian, her accent thick with emotion. "My mother gave it to me when I carried Enzo. Now it guards your twins." Ivy's fingers closed around the warm metal, tears pricking her eyes as Maria blessed her in the old way, touching her forehead and belly with gentle hands. 2 weeks later, on a crisp morning, Ivy gripped Enzo's hand during their first detailed ultrasound, the technician pointing out tiny fingers and perfect profiles. A week after that, Enzo presented the council with restructured business plans, redirecting profits from protection rackets into legitimate holdings: real estate, import and export, technology investments. The old guard grumbled, but couldn't argue with the increased profits and decreased police attention. 3 days later, walking the waterfront at sunset, Enzo showed Ivy the community center rising from a former warehouse. "No more shadows," he said, his hand protective over her growing belly. "Our children will see what we build in the light." Another week passed, and Ivy's ankles swelled for the first time. That evening, Enzo read pregnancy books aloud in terrible accents until she laughed so hard she hiccuped. 2 weeks slipped by, marked by nursery painting and council meetings, where Ivy's sharp mind helped reshape their empire into something sustainable. The twins grew stronger, kicking against her ribs as if dancing to the classical music Enzo played each night. A month later, Ivy reorganized the clinic wing, ensuring everything would be ready when labor began. She caught Enzo practicing swaddling with dolls when he thought no one was watching. 3 weeks passed in a blur of medical checkups and security upgrades. Enzo installed a garden on the roof, determined their children would have grass under their feet even 80 stories up. 10 days later, snow fell for the first time that winter. Ivy stood at the window, watching the flakes swirl, while Enzo worked nearby, always within reach now as her due date approached. At 2:13 a.m. on a quiet Tuesday, Ivy woke to the first contractions. The city seemed to hold its breath as news spread through their network. The Valente heirs were coming. Enzo never left her side, supporting her through each wave of pain, his usual iron control softening into tender concern. The medical team moved efficiently, monitoring 3 heartbeats with careful precision. Hours passed in a fog of determination and focused breathing. Snow continued falling outside, muffling the world beyond their windows. At 11:47 p.m., the first cry pierced the air. A girl with Enzo's dark hair. 4 minutes later, her brother followed, equally loud and perfect. As the medical team cleaned and checked the infants, Enzo pressed his forehead to Ivy's, his voice thick with emotion. "By winter, you'll birth me twins," he quoted his own words from that first night, then added softly. "And I'll spend every winter, after proving you were never a possession, you were the reason." Later that evening, in the warmth of the nursery, Ivy carefully placed the first sonogram photo into a silver frame. The moment they'd first seen 2 tiny hearts beating. Enzo lay with his head in her lap between the cribs, one hand stretched out to each baby. The city lights spread steady and calm beyond their windows, no sirens or threats breaking the peace. Their world had transformed from one ruled by fear to one founded on choice and protection. The old ledgers were closed, the debts settled, the future secure. "They need names," Ivy murmured, running her fingers through Enzo's hair. "My mother suggested her grandmother's name for our daughter, Sophia." "Sophia," Ivy tested the sound. "And for him? What was your father's name?" "Marco." "Sophia and Marco Hale Valente," Enzo said softly. "Strong names for a new generation." The twins slept peacefully, unaware they had been wished for by an entire city. Outside, the snow continued falling, covering the streets in pristine white, nature's own fresh start. Ivy thought of that rainy night in the diner, how impossible this moment would have seemed then. Yet here they were, their path carved not by fate but by choice, trust, and the courage to believe in something better. The security teams maintained their quiet vigilance, the council chambers stood empty until morning, and their allies rested easy, knowing the succession was secured. Every loose end had been tied, every threat neutralized, not through brutality, but justice. In the peaceful nursery, surrounded by the soft sounds of new life, Ivy and Enzo had created more than heirs. They'd built a foundation for a different kind of empire, one where love and loyalty meant more than fear and force. The clock ticked past midnight, marking the end of one era and the beginning of another. Sophia stirred slightly, and Marco yawned, their tiny movements drawing their parents' instinctive attention. This was their victory? Not the power or the politics, but these quiet moments of pure love.